Today we'll be discussing time as history. The fact that we see time as linear, as going from point A to point B, is new. And the belief that it is us, humans, who shape and create our own future within a sea of limitless possibilities is also new. It hasn't always been this way. This concept, the belief in making our own future in linear time, is called history. Now, this may be confusing to some. Too many of us simply think that history is the study of the past, inquiring into a former time that has now lapsed. But history is also a certain dimension of reality, an unfolding, if you will, of human existing. This is the definition we are concerned with, the making of things in time. It is what drives modernity, and its centrality cannot be denied. Let's just look at a few recent events. Whether we are talking about advances in technology such as space exploration, history making, historic making moments, governance, history making, historic moment, history making, historic moments, identity questions, makes history, history making moments, politics, history in the making, historic moment, history, or how things turn out with all of these headlines about being on the right side of history. Clearly, we are not talking about a former time which has now lapsed. Hopefully, that quick intro was enough to convince you of the importance of history in our culture, and you'll recognize the need to have a fuller understanding. We'll need a little bit more depth now, so I'll expand on the definition. Then we'll go through these topics: time, nature, and the emergence of history. History is more than just the sequence of events which unfolds in time. It's also our understanding of things, our way of understanding things. To know about anything is to know its genesis, its development up to the present, and as much of its future as we can. Clearly, one sees that this is contrary to living in the instantaneous moment. To understand things in terms of history is a fundamental mark of what it is to be modern. So, in true modern fashion, let's look at the history of history. There are two important events to take note of. The first important event is the discovery of the future. Jews are often credited with discovering time by orienting themselves towards a messianic future, an upcoming event where a savior would arrive and deliver the prophesied nation. Before that, people saw themselves as repeating the fading patterns of a past golden age of mythical gods, or a pale shadow of the eternal. The second important event is the Age of Progress. This happened in Europe in the 1600s. Humans no longer confined themselves to living out divinely established patterns, which kept chaos at bay, and instead began seeing themselves as free to make their own events. This freedom to make events in linear time was radically different than the previous understanding of time, cyclical time, which we'll take a look at now. Archaic time is not at all like our modern scientific notion of time. Time was not merely the abstract possibility for change as it is understood today. Rather, time was the cause of change. Time itself carried reality from one point to another and was cyclical in nature. Change was not anything new per se, but a force that eventually overturned everything. And time was contrasted to space, which was the stabilizing power against the forces of time. So two forces were constantly pushing against each other: the transformative forces of time and the stabilizing forces of space. You had to do work, that is, apply the forces of space to keep the forces of time from overturning everything. Time is what would make a field be overgrown with weeds when left to its own. We could have said, oh, you let time get to your field. It is what eroded relationships and communities, or made civilizations fall. We'd say the people became blasé and time got to it. Ancient people discovered ways that could withstand the destructive forces of time, and these patterns were shared across the people to ensure their survival. Even though the cosmology may appear naive from a materialistic perspective, its symbolism is still insightful and universal. It points to an ancient form of metaphysics from an age when spiritual knowledge was the primary concern of humanity. In contrast, nowadays, modern profane time is merely the abstract possibility for change, and the cyclical nature of time is seen as not real and not necessarily inherent to time itself. All right, so now we know about cyclical time and linear time. Now let's look at how the term history arose to distinguish itself from nature. But for this, we also need to understand the previous understanding of nature. In the archaic world, nature was seen as God's creation. It was a static universe with unchanging species, and everything was set in its proper place by the perfection of God. This was the cosmological order of nature. Everything from the smallest grain of sand to the largest of land animals, from the lowest of peasants to the highest ruler, had its proper place in a beautiful order created by God, an order that could be ascertained by contemplation. A thing was said to be natural, or fulfilling its nature, when it was in its proper place in this whole. A bird was natural so long as it flew in the sky, laid eggs, and did whatever else it is that a bird does. In betweens, like birds that can't fly or fish that can be out of water, would be considered grotesque, as monsters as at the edge of the world. It's a good thing they didn't know about platypuses. But being natural was not limited to animals. Humans also had a specified nature. Things such as an unmarried things such as an unmarried woman, a king working the field, or a man caught up in leisure would have been deemed unnatural as going against this beautiful order of God. Any sort of breaking the mold of idiosyncrasies or oddities would have been deemed unnatural. At this time, it wasn't because of bigoted intolerance, but because you exposed yourself and your community to the destructive forces of time. It could flood your world with chaos and disorder. So, to repeat, in archaic cosmology, nature was fulfilling one's immanent meaning by taking one's proper place in the whole. But then around the 1600s, we began to be more and more interested in studying the mechanics of the material world. This is the modern physics of Galileo, Descartes, Newton, and all that followed. In this optic, we began to be increasingly concerned with the physical world and our bodies, and began studying phenomena without an a priori role that it had to fulfill. Soon after, nature no longer meant fulfilling one's immanent meaning in the cosmological order, but instead came to mean the mechanics of the physical world and our bodies without physical cause. It was in this intellectual crisis that the concept of history first made its appearance. Some thinkers welcomed the modern scientific conception of nature, but wanted to relate that conception to human purpose. Questions about man thus arose. How do men, who are part of such a nature, still have the freedom to know it and are affected by their determination by this nature? Thinkers who were unwilling to reduce what they considered the undoubted given of morality, but who accepted this new account of nature, reconciled any difficulties by positing that our lives are lived in two realms, the realm of nature and the realm of freedom. Thus, in the 1700s, the concept of history, the ability to act in the realm of freedom, first appeared. To situate ourselves, the American Revolution happened in 1775 and the French Revolution happened in 1789. Let's have a closer look at how nations conceptualize history. English thinkers insist that we apply the word history to man as well as to stones and birds, since stones have geological formation and birds have evolution. But French and German thinkers insist of the uniqueness of the human situation and use the distinction between nature and history to make that clear. We can understand this better if we look at their concept of freedom. American freedom is simply freedom from interference. If a bear isn't leashed or caged and can move about freely, it would be said to be free. The other form of freedom, we'll call it self determining freedom, would say that the bear at large doesn't meet the criteria for freedom. Because, yeah, the bear might not be restrained, but it is simply acting from its instinctual drives. It hasn't made any choices that are truly its own. This applies to a wide range of examples. For American freedom, an addict has freedom when no one prevents him from taking his dose. Applying the concept of self determining freedom, we would say that the addict is not free because it is not the addict who is actually driving his choices, rather, it is his dependence which is at the helm. The same principle would apply for purchasing triggered by manipulative advertising, being influenced by peer pressure, being swayed by a charismatic authority, and so on and so forth. A certain break from your instincts or the exterior is needed. Self determining freedom is a much more evolved concept then, but the goodness of this freedom can be put into question when looking at its fruits. Yes, it's upstanding to overcome your instincts, external pressure, and the conformative conventions of a bygone era, but you can still choose to squander your newfound freedom. Now, the following will be an oversimplification and a bit hyperbolic, but the point needs to be recognized. It seems to be what I see with the public intellectuals of France who seem satisfied with the sensual lifestyle in the absurdity of life, a deconstructed reality. Or the German philosophers who tend to be enclosed in their little circles with their plans for a universal and homogeneous state and a hell-bent will to power being an end in itself. If we want to look at the fruits of German philosophy, we have to recognize that it is out of German thought that the two extremes of power we talk about today arose: communism and Nazism, two systems of governance that have both led to atrocities, each responsible for the deaths of tens of millions. And I just want to note that of the continued relevance of this in American politics, where to this day, the left accuses the right of being Nazis and the right accuses the left of being Marxist commies. But let's get back to the French and German thought. Yes, in these philosophies, one may have chosen from a place of self-determined freedom. It is really them who chose it, free from any sort of influence, instinctual, external, or as a product of an unexamined past. So it is very quite advanced, so to speak. But let's be honest, how many people are really convinced that this is the best that human civilization has to offer? If you like power, you take a fully understood bid at a Nazi or commie candidacy. And if you don't like power, you consciously select an unrestricted, self-indulgent lifestyle in an absurd, deconstructed world. This is where Canadian thinkers come in. Your true self is not just any self-determination. Once we are beyond American freedom, where the choices are not properly ours, and we are operating within self-determining freedom, there are still strong and weak determinations. This is because self-determined freedom is grounded into something larger than yourself. Uh, it introduces a new horizon. It can thus reconcile the ever-changing fact of history with the unchanging, immutable essence of reality that was eclipsed by the age of progress. I haven't quite finished processing this material yet, so it'll be subject matter for future talks. But the supposedly irreducible relativity and meaninglessness of the deconstructed world is surpassed. It reintroduces the need and value of contemplation, which was lost at the onset of the age of progress. New choices are henceforth not made from a place of intolerance, but a place of self-determined freedom grounded in a larger vision. If anyone who isn't an extremist, I think anyone who isn't an extremist would agree that this sounds like simple common sense. But as we can see, it is actually ultra modern, groundbreaking stuff at the forefront of history. Anyways, it's remarkable stuff, but Canadian philosophy is not the topic of this video. So we'll just end with the key points of this video. Modern man perceives time as linear, that is, as moving from point A to point B, and it is us, mankind, who shapes and creates our own destiny. This dimension of reality, human existing in time, is called history. And history occurs in the realm of freedom, choice action, not in the realm of nature, the mechanistic world of physical objects. Different nationalities have different objectives in freedom. All right. Have a good week, everyone.